Good morning. As you've heard, our theme for today is Be Transformed. Our scripture lesson today addresses transformation to the pattern of Jesus Christ rather than conforming to the norms of the world. Transformation involves change. It is hard work. It's so much easier just to conform to the norms of the time. When something is regarded as a norm, people cease to judge it harshly. They are inclined to think that the norm is just the way things are, or even more damaging, the norm is the way things should be. They feel less motivated to change. In the book Sabbath Resistance, Walter Brueggemann, an American Protestant Old Testament scholar and theologian, suggests ways that he feels we need to transform our society. I'm just going to share two ways. He has several different ways in his book, but I'm going to share two of his suggestions. He states that from where he sits, he feels that the world today seems to be involved in an economic rat race. There seems to be a demand to do more and more, to work more and more, to produce more and more. We never seem to have enough. Yet, if we look at the example that God showed us in the beginning, we see a much different picture. In 6 days, the Lord created heaven and earth and the sun and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day and consecrated it. God rested. Imagine that. God enjoyed a work stoppage. God did not show up to do more work. He did not go back to the office to check on his creation in anxiety to be sure that it was working. He had complete confidence in his creation. He rested. He was serene. He was at peace. What a contrast to the way that we live our lives today. Walter Brueggemann says that perhaps it would be wise for us to build some rest into our daily lives. Perhaps, he says, if we would do that, we would not have so much stress, so much anxiety, and so many mental health issues as we have in our world today. But it would require a great deal of transformation from the norms of the world today. But he feels that rest is important. If we had more time, I would elaborate on that, but I'll save that for another time. Here's another thought of Walter Brueggemann's. He says, in the world today, prosperity seems to be taken for granted. But anyone who has lived as long as he has, and I checked to see how old he is now, because I've read about Walter Brueggemann for a long time. He's now 90 years old. But he says anybody who's lived as long as he has knows that we have not always lived as comfortably as we live today. And he says living in comfort can lead to temptations and become seductive. He says we think that we can manage on our own without God in our lives. When Moses led the Israelite slaves from Egypt to the Promised Land, he stopped at the Jordan River to give them instructions about how they were going to need to live in this new land. He was concerned because he felt that going to the new land where they would find affluence compared to where they had been living in Egypt as slaves, he was concerned once they were exposed to that affluence, they might forget what it was like when they lived as slaves in Egypt. And it would cause them to think that they didn't need the Lord anymore. He said to them, he gave them this warning. He said, "Take care that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the houses of slavery. Then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God. In our affluence, maybe we should remember those words that Moses spoke to the slaves as they were headed to the promised land and apply that warning to our lives and our world today. For if we are going to pattern our lives after Jesus Christ, we're going to have to make a lot of changes in our life. A lot of transforming will have to take place. Yet, as we heard in our call to worship, a few vibrant witnesses can transform the world. One person at a time. Today, I want to tell you some stories. And these are stories about transformation, stories about people who have been transformed. In her book, God All Around, Linda Booth tells a story about a lady whose name is Charlotte. Her life was transformed by a young teacher and the Portland, Oregon congregation. Charlotte was a drug addict. She had 3 children. One of her children, a daughter, was in the classroom of a teacher who attended the Portland, Oregon congregation. The teacher became concerned when that child did not show up in her classroom for several days in a row. So she wanted to find out why the child was not coming to school. When she checked in the office and everybody that she knew that might have had any information, the only thing that she could find out was that Charlotte and her children had been evicted from their apartment and they were living somewhere in Portland in one of the parks, but nobody knew just where they were. The teacher began to pray for her student. And then she realized that she needed to do something more than just pray. She needed to do something. So as soon as Saturday got there, she went to the parks of Portland and started walking through the parks to see if she could find her student. She did find them. She found Charlotte and her 3 children sitting on a blanket in one of the parks in Portland, Oregon. She sat down beside Charlotte to listen to her story. Charlotte told her that she had no place to go. She had no family to provide her any support. The young teacher told her that she had been praying for her and her family. And then she did a very bold thing. She told Charlotte if she would go to drug rehab, she, the teacher, would take her 3 children and care for them. Charlotte thought about it and she agreed. She said she would go to rehab. So that teacher took her 3 children, and between that teacher and the Portland congregation, they cared for those children as though they were their own. They even paid for them to take music lessons. Charlotte, from time to time, would get out as she worked through the drug rehab for a pass for a couple of days. And when she was out on a weekend, the teacher would invite her to come to church with them because, of course, the teacher and the children were going to church. And another time, when Charlotte was out later in the program, she asked if she could have some envelopes. You know, we all used to get boxes of envelopes. She asked if she could have envelopes because she wanted to give something back to the church that was doing so much for her and her family. Charlotte completed her drug rehab program, and members of the Portland congregation helped her find a job and an apartment where they could live. With the passing of time, Charlotte and 2 of her children were baptized and confirmed in the church. Some years later, after Charlotte had completed rehab, was out on her own and doing well, Linda Booth returned to that congregation. She had been to that congregation several times previously, and so she felt that she knew that congregation well. She actually went this time to ordain a man to the office of evangelist. But she noticed as she sat up front looking out over the congregation that the church was packed with people. And that had not been true when she was there before. She'd never seen the church so full of people. And she wondered who all of these people were that she'd never seen before. So when the service was over, she said to the pastor, "I've never seen your church so packed. Who are all of these people? Where did they come from?" And the pastor said, after Charlotte was baptized and confirmed in the church, she went back to the rehab center and she witnessed to the people in the rehab center. And then she walked out on the street and she witnessed to people on the street. And she told them that there was a community in their town that would love them unconditionally, would accept them just as the way they were. And she invited them to become a part of that community. And so here they were, an assortment of people whose lives were being transformed one day at a time through the gospel of Jesus Christ and a loving congregation who indeed did accept them, love them unconditionally, accepted them as they were, just as Jesus did. Charlotte's life was transformed. The people that she witnessed to were transformed. The teacher who started the whole process off, her life was transformed, and the Portland congregation's life was transformed, one person at a time. That's Charlotte's amazing story of transformation. Now I want to tell you another story, but this story is about how social judgments can affect the way that we see others and see ourselves. This story of transformation is very old. It comes from Arthur Miller's very first book that he wrote, entitled Focus. The world was a very different place at that time because this book was written in 1945. At that time, Jews were not welcomed with open arms into our country. In fact, Jews were not welcomed into our country at all. This book that he wrote, this first book, was one of the first books written about anti-Semitism in the wake of the Nazi regime's systematic murder of European Jews. The story is set in New York City. World War II is coming to a close. The main character is a man named Newman, a white Christian man charged with making sure that no Jews posing as Christians were hired into his company. He took great pride in protecting his company from what they at that time considered the scourge of Jews coming to our country. In fact, he was supposed to be one of the best in spotting Jews. With time, as time went along, his eyes began not to be as sharp, and he was making some mistakes in spotting out the Jews. And so he knew he was going to have to do something or he was going to be in big trouble at work. So he bought a pair of glasses. Sure enough, those glasses worked magic. He could see very clearly again. And how he was right back to the business of working, keeping Jews out of his company. But the glasses created a much bigger problem for him than he had anticipated. When he put those glasses on, people around him said he resembled the very kind of persons that he had been hired to protect them from. They said they were suspicious that he was Jewish. He was mortified. and did everything to make it very clear to everybody around him that he was not Jewish. Yet the suspicion lingered on. There was nothing that he could do or say that would change their minds. In fact, when he looked at himself in the mirror, he could see why perhaps they might think that he was Jewish. His life became unhinged. He was fired from his job. He became a target of anti-Semitism. Neighbors and passersby would throw garbage on his lawn and write words that were not good on his house. He became a target by others. And as that happened, that began to have an effect on how he saw himself. The loathing that he had felt for Jewish people earlier turned into self-loathing. He became the person that he once had kept out from the company that he worked for. Once he experienced the attitudes and the feelings directed at the Jewish people, he was able to develop a greater understanding and appreciation for what he himself had been doing to Jewish people all of that time. Having to look at the Jewish people with a new perspective or new eyes, so to speak, he was transformed. He broke free from the narrow negative image that he had of the Jewish people. Transformation is hard, but it can also be freeing. He started out conforming to the norms of the world in which he lived. But as the scripture says, he renewed his mind and was transformed. That same kind of transformation that he had is the kind of transformation that we need to have in our world today when we look at people who look different from us. Now I'd like to share with you just a portion of a poem called The Hill We Climb. This is a poem written by Amanda Gorman, and you heard the entire poem if you watched President Biden's inauguration, because she read the entire poem at his inauguration. And remember, at the time, she was only 22 years old. I've adapted a few of the words to make them fit with our theme, Be Transformed. But basically, these are Amanda Gorman's words. We are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we're striving to form a world that is perfect. We are striving to lead our world to be committed to all cultures, all colors, all characters and conditions of man. We lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but to what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our concerns so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to no one and harmony for all. So let us leave behind a world better than the one we were left. We will raise the wounded world to a wondrous one. For there is always light if we are brave enough to see it. If we are brave enough to be it. I think those are amazing words for a 22-year-old to write about transformation. We have the capacity to change. We can change ourselves, we can change our world, and we can change our relationship to our world. May we be brave enough to embrace transformation.